Today I had the pleasure of welcoming Chris Haigh to the podcast. Chris and I had a great chat about what it would cost if your business was to suffer a cyber breach. We talked about some real life examples, some a little bit scary, and Chris also offered up some actionable tips for our listeners, both personally and for their business, that can be implemented straight away. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to Tech Insights, Chris.
Thank you.
So we've worked together for quite some time now, probably about 5 years.
I would say so, yeah.
So I do know a little bit about your background, but how about you share with the listeners, what got you into cybersecurity and why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah, sure. So originally South African, and back there I was interested in tech as a young kid, and then kind of moved from there. I went into, I think it was like sales firstly in computers, and then got more interested in the technical side. So I kind of just started studying the technical side, and then eventually moved into that side of things and ended up in training, weirdly enough. So I was actually a technical trainer for many years, firstly within Microsoft, then the A+ series came out and I was busy doing that. So like hardware and software and things like that. And then eventually Cisco. But even back then, so this is probably 98, I was already teaching security subjects. So there was a particular security course I used to teach under the Microsoft side of things. So training engineers how to break in to a system, for the idea being that you then know how to secure it. So that was the concept.
Well, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that you did that.
Yeah. So way back then, it was not quite penetration testing, but kind of similar. And it was very Microsoft focused at that point. Then I moved to the UK. I was there for 11 years. Started my own business there as a Microsoft Gold partner with a few partners. And then it was pretty much focused on security. So lots of firewall configurations and that kind of stuff. And then eventually moved to Australia. Yeah. So
Wow, you've had quite a diverse background in technology then.
moved around a bit.
Yes, I definitely didn't know half of that. So that's, really interesting. Yeah. Well, today you're here to talk to us about the true cost of a cyber breach. So I think, the listeners would love to hear about, what exactly it costs and what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. The reason why I came up with this particular topic is, we often do a lot of education. So my main passion is still education because I came from that trainer background. So education around people running business and cybersecurity within that, because I always felt that people didn't quite understand where that fit in, which is understandable. It's kind of like going, okay, well, I run a business doing X, right? I don't need to know about the technical side of things, because you shouldn't have to. You should know about your business and what you're doing. That's the expert, right? You're the expert in X. So then it was a case of going, always educating people around that. And what I found is when I moved to Australia, I kind of felt like there was definitely she'll be all right, as in I'm not going to worry about cybersecurity until I have to worry about it.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and I just saw a lot of businesses getting hit like really badly, so they're not aware of the actual impact that can happen, and it does take a toll on a lot of people. And then the last breach that we dealt with as a business, it just reinforced all of that. And there's a lot of emotion around it. It's quite hard for a business owner to see how much impact it's having on them, the stress levels, staff. It's pretty insane. The last one we dealt with was the Robin Hood ransomware gang. And one staff member was telling me at some point, they said, I was watching TV with my kids and this thing popped up and it was about Robin Hood. And she said, I literally had I could feel it in my body. And I was like, okay, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's quite a visceral impact for everyone.
Oh, definitely.
And when you start getting down to the costs to the business of not just your psychological costs, but then actual costs. And that's where even where you have businesses going, oh, we got cyber insurance, they'll cover it. And mostly or not at all.
Yeah, well, that is a scary side of it, I guess, is that people think they're covered and then all of a sudden something happens and not so much.
You might not be. So unfortunately, you've got to be answering the questions correctly in the insurance documents. And if you make a mistake, right, the insurance doesn't care. It's a case of going, you said you do training with staff. We can see you don't, therefore we're not paying. So we had a customer, must have been about 5 or 6 years ago now, where the criminal gang broke in through a remote desktop service. And then from that machine, they moved to the accounting system.
Oh, that's
so
scary.
The payroll system,
Yes.
right? And then from the payroll system, they changed everyone's bank accounts to theirs. This was on, I think, a Sunday night. And then the payroll ran Tuesday morning. And then they got their first request Wednesday morning going, hey, I don't have my pay-in account. They started looking and it was a bunch of staff. It was about $80,000 for the weekly pay run that they were out. They immediately contacted their bank. The bank managed to retrieve about 40. So put stops and et cetera on. So they retrieved 40. And the other 40,000, they did actually have cyber insurance, which is great because back then not a lot of businesses did, 4 or 5 years ago. And they were denied because they hadn't done cybersecurity training with their staff.
Oh, that would just be devastating.
But again, the box was ticked when they filled in the forms. So there's those sort of costs, and it's trying to make sure people have a good understanding of what the actual threat is and so forth. And the other problem is, I think because you're not an expert in it, you are potentially worrying about the wrong thing. So an example here, the last one we dealt with, the company was more concerned about the financial side of things so that the criminals would get into, for instance, trust accounts and could manipulate funds there. And that's not what the target was. The target was the personal identifiable information of their clients.
Oh, because so once they get a hold of that, what do they generally use that for?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So ransomware, so type of malware that encrypts your data so you don't have access to it. So quite often it brings a business to a grinding halt. All of a sudden I can't look up a client's file, I can't print, I can't do this. Basically you can't work, right? So it locks up that entire business. So the idea was then the criminal gang would contact them going, hey, we've locked up all your files, pay us X amount of money and we will unlock it. So this is just through an unencryption, but we'll basically unlock it and then you can carry on working. And that's how it was for years. And the payments were relatively low. So it might have been right down to $200, $250, somewhere around there, right? So most often businesses would just pay, get their stuff unlocked and they could carry on working. But then people started getting clever, right? So as a business like ours, we've got backups of customer data. So they'd be like, oh, we've locked up all your data. And we were like, don't worry about it. We just restore it and you've got all your data back and you can carry on working maybe within a few hours. Great. Yeah. Easy. Yeah. So obviously the ransomware gangs had to move on. They were like, okay, how do we get paid then if this is happening? Right. So the first thing they did is look for the backups. So they'll encrypt your data and they'll find the backups and they'll encrypt that as well. So that's where we had to start getting clever about where the backups were kept and how do you keep that safe off the network so it can't get access to it, all those kind of things. But again, they move one step further. What about if we take a copy of the data, then lock it up and go pay, we'll unlock it. If you don't, we're going to sell the data on the dark web. So then you're going to have public damage, right?
Oh,
it's a publicity issue now because your customers are going to see that you've not secured your networks properly. You haven't cared for the data you hold on us. So, and that's now that ransom part that's where it's moved to.
Well, it's really escalated.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely escalated. And you can imagine if the customer was someone that does collect a lot of personal identifiable information. So you'll see this as PI data or PII data.
Yes.
So personal identifiable information, passports, et cetera, driver's licenses and so forth. And you think of the businesses that keep that kind of stuff. First one in my mind that pops up is real estate.
That's true.
They collect a lot of that information. So real estate, and the other one, of course, is legal. Next one, probably financial firms.
Yes.
So independent financial advisors, legal, etc. Where there's other records, probably more medical. So then it starts getting into dentists, hospitals, etc. They've got that kind of data as well.
Yeah.
So in this case, yes, the personal identifiable information is what the target was, and it was exactly that. We will sell this data unless you pay. And it was. It's passports, driver's licenses, Medicare numbers, a lot of data. So,
as a business owner, to get a message like that must be just so terrifying.
It absolutely is. And that's where I wanted to have that conversation with people and educate them, okay, what is this going to look like? And what can you do? Because the main thing is not to panic, right? It's happened. So what are the correct steps that you can resolve the matter as quickly and as cheaply as possible, right?
Well, I guess that's a hard thing too, because like you say, there'd be so much emotion wrapped up in why me? Why was I targeted? It would be you'd have to step aside, let the emotions go, and like you say, follow the steps to rectify the situation.
And there's a couple of things around this. Firstly, we'll just talk about dispelling the myth of why me. Which is, it's never about you. No, you weren't targeted. So quite often, the majority of the attacks that we see, especially for small and medium business, is you're just going to get wrapped up in a kind of a spray attack. So they're going to just target anyone and everyone that they can, and whoever bites that they can get in, great. And that's essentially what's going to happen. If you're a different business, so let's say you were a contractor for the government or you were a university, then yes, you're going to be targeted because you're known to have potential very valuable information. Yeah. So you will be targeted, and your cybersecurity's got to be on a different level, absolutely. But for the majority of small, medium businesses, again, if they're not contractors to the government and all those kind of things, or sitting within a supply chain to any kind of critical infrastructure, so you're not dealing with electricity, water, airports, etc. Then it's they're not after you, but you do need enough cybersecurity controls in place so that you can actually deal with it. So.
Yeah, I think it would be hard to not take it personally, but obviously it's kind of a bit of a numbers game, isn't it? They're just casting the net and seeing what they can catch.
Absolutely, and whether that's through a phishing attack or there's a hole in your network because of a vulnerability. And the last one we dealt with was exactly that. There was a particular vulnerability. And unfortunately, you start getting down to, because people go like, okay, but you just patch, right? You update the software and that fixes the vulnerability. And it's like, yes and no. There's a lag time between when the vulnerability is live and potentially not known about in the public space, but known about in the criminal gangs, to when the vendor knows about it and patches the software. So that's that lag time becomes an issue. In this particular case that we were talking about, the government's actually issued a warning around this particular vulnerability on this particular device. And that was in early July. And we double checked that everything was patched, and it was. And we were like, great. That customer still got done by the criminal gang. And when we did the forensics check, they had actually been in the system 3 months prior. So you're talking about an alert coming out from the government going, you need to patch this, and it's too late.
Well, that's scary in itself, isn't it?
It is. And just to be clear, when I say we did the forensics, we as in Mercury didn't do the forensics. Forensics were done by a third-party forensics company. And that's something I wanted to talk about as well is, there's a number of parties that are involved in a ransomware attack and dealing with the aftermath of that. So you kind of need to decide whether you're going to go down that path or you're going to kind of deal with it yourself. And that's a choice for the business. So it's, am I going to involve insurance? Like I'm paying for it, so should I? Versus I can deal with this myself. And that is a conversation you do need to have. A lot of people go, well, obviously you'd use the insurance. And I go, well, no. Let's say you've got insurance on your car, right? You've got excess. Take my excess. I'm talking about this because my car got pranked last week, right? In a parking lot. So park the car, somebody pulls out wide, scrapes the side of the car. Lovely. I've got $1,000 excess on my car. So I was like, okay. And it was this man, and he drove off.
You did tell me this story, and I still can't believe that he just drove off.
I got a photo of his number plates and so forth, right? And I'd lodged the claim, and I had a mate look at it and go, they'll just buff out. Like, just get some cut and polish, and it's not dented. It's just, and I was like, oh yeah. Like, I didn't even think about it, I was like, oh, I'll just pay the $1,000. Like, I've got $1,000 lying around, right? Like everyone. So I was like, no, actually, no. So I called the insurance company back and I canceled the claim. And they were like, oh, why are you cancelling it? And I was like, because I don't want to pay $1,000. Thank you.
Well, that's it.
And that's the point. So you do need to decide whether you're going to bring,
cost.
Because it depends how big the impact is and what you're actually going to be dealing with. And
also after the claim, I'm guessing that your premium will go up, and it presumably would. I think in most cases. I mean, I'll run you through the example in this scenario where they called their insurance and went, okay, there's been this massive hack into our system. They've broken into the system, and they get the wheels turning in assigning an incident response manager. And then they get a number of people involved. And this is the start of what I wanted to educate people about you need to be aware of how much time this is going to take. Because immediately they want to have meetings with the customer, with us as the managed service provider of the systems, because we might have to provide evidence and etc. So they're calling you into a meeting, right? The first meeting we jumped on, there were 15 people in this meeting across 4 different businesses, right? I mean, that's a cost alone, isn't it? Just to have that many people
so
there.
So we've got, from the customer, you've got the owner of the business plus 2 other staff members that are going to need to help. And there were more staff that had to be involved as well eventually. But so you got 3 people on that side that are all being paid X amount of money, right, to now sit on a call that's maybe an hour long. And you having a call, I think within the first week, we were doing 1, if not 2 calls per day talking about various things. So it's getting everybody together, and it's the forensics team, it's that incident response manager, it's the legal side of things and so forth.
That sounds expensive.
Yeah, it is at the end of the day. And it's expensive as well just in time, right? Because you keep getting pulled into the room and you have to talk and provide this and provide that and answer questions about this and that and et cetera. And there's a lot of time for the owner of that business, so the business itself and staff, as well as then the managed service provider that's involved and everybody else.
Yeah.
Right? And just because people will often go like, okay, I don't know, why is there so many people involved? And I go, okay, well, there's the insurance company has got a vested interest in what's going on, right? Because obviously they don't want to pay out, right? You have an incident manager that's coordinating, right? What happens next? Who do we get involved? Coordinating the meetings, etc. You have a forensics team get involved because they need to know, right, how did they get in? When did they get in? What did they touch? What data was touched? Then once they have that information, then you've got specialists that are then combing through the data looking for personal identifiable information. So there's almost like a data categorization specialist going through that part. And we're talking thousands of dollars to do this, right? Investigation. So they're running through what that looks like. There's legal to give you advice around the law, right? Because you've got a notifiable data breach, right, scheme under the Privacy Act that most businesses are caught under. So, and again, a lot of businesses don't understand that they are caught under this. There is a legal obligation. If there's personal identifiable information involved in a breach and there's a potential for harm, whether it's physical harm, financial harm, psychological harm, there's various harms, then you are going to have to notify the Information Commissioner. So there's a duty there.
So what happens if you are breached and that information is stolen, but you don't notify?
Look, technically you could get away with it because who knows? So it might be a case of that data gets sold on to the dark web, becomes public knowledge. You might have clients that have noted their data out there, right? Or they might actually be attacked themselves through phishing and that because their data is out there. And then they go back to you as the business going, hey, you've lost my data. So technically they could raise a claim. They could go to the Information Commissioner and go, hey, my data was leaked. If they know, of course, there's got to be some sort of
there's got to be, that's
you know.
it. It'd be very hard, I imagine, for someone to prove that that's where the information came from.
Yeah.
And if they do get caught, is there some sort of fine or? Potentially,
yeah. So far there's been no fines. That law came in I think it was 2018. So February 2018, we had the notifiable data breach scheme come in. And the fine at the time, I think, was just over 2 million, 2.2, somewhere around there.
Well, that's a hefty fine, isn't it?
It is a hefty fine. And they actually threatened directors as well of a fine, so a personal fine of, I think it was around 420,000, somewhere around there. They do it in units. It's a weird measurement. So the idea is like 400,000 you've got to have lying around as a director because you could be taken to court. And then, of course, 2.2 million for the business. And you've got to have that lying around somewhere. Does insurance, maybe your insurance covers it. It's, it's something to certainly think about. But recently, was it end of last year? I think somewhere around there, they increased that fine to potentially 50 million or above.
That seems a substantial increase.
It's a massive increase, but they're bringing it in line with GDPR laws in Europe, right? So their laws are substantially stronger around privacy and protecting privacy, where ours were maybe a little bit lacking. And they still are. They're adjusting them as we go. And we expect that they will line up to something like GDPR laws, or the Californian privacy laws are also very strict. It could potentially be more than 50 million because it now goes on turnover of business, which is similar to the GDPR laws. So it could be massive. But again, no fines yet. Medibank would be an interesting one because now we're seeing what's happening with that.
Yes, that's a good case to watch.
Yeah.
See what happens there.
Exactly.
But yeah, I think like a lot of businesses, probably small to medium, aren't that aware of, all these things behind the scenes if you are breached.
No, absolutely. And, just kind of coming back to the people that are involved and what that looks like. And because quite often you'll have customers go, okay, so they want to charge me, let's say $10,000. Like, why don't I just pay it and I'll get the data back? I mean, there's a couple of things there that I do want to caution against. Number one, it's generally not $10,000 anymore. It's probably closer to $500,000 is where often we'll start.
Well, so that will hurt
or more. So you got to be careful with that as an actual cost. But the other thing is looking at the legal ramifications around that as well, because the idea here is you're going like, okay, I'll pay, I'll get the data back, and off I go, right? You're negotiating with the criminal.
I was
right?
thinking that.
So it's kind of like, oh yeah, no, we're honest criminals. You pay us, we will absolutely delete your data. I'm like,
Yeah, sounds very suspicious.
right. And the thing is there have been criminal gangs taken apart by one of the 3-letter agencies, whether it was FBI, CIA, I can't remember. But they found infrastructure, so servers, et cetera, that were used in ransomware attacks. And the data was all on those devices.
So you could be paying up and still...
I'm not saying they were used, but the data certainly was there on the systems where they've gone back and looked, oh, it was this business, right? Because they could see the data, right? So they go, oh, it's this business. Oh, they paid the ransomware and they said that they'd delete it and it was sitting there. Now, were they going to on-sell that? So secondary black market somewhere, potentially? You don't know, right? But again, you're talking to a criminal.
I know you can't expect a criminal to be honest.
Exactly. And I tell you what, you've got insurance companies that have, so now here's another group, another party that's involved. You have professional negotiators for ransomware. So these people have experience in actually talking to these ransomware gangs to basically lower the costs, right? So and what happens is they actually get to know the ransomware gangs and which ones are quote unquote honest, as in, this particular gang would normally reduce the cost of what they've asked by half straight away. They know that. So they don't muck around. They get on there and go, hey, yeah, it's you again. Like, can we go from $1 million to $500,000? Yes, awesome. I'll go back to my client, that kind of thing. And then they know generally if they pay, that data's not going to be sold.
That's certainly a different career.
It's very interesting.
A ransomware negotiator
is literally what it is. So, and then beyond that, it gets very interesting as well. And then this is another party that gets involved, which is, let's say you choose to pay the ransom. Okay. Is the group that you're paying it to, right, sanctioned by Australia? As in, is the group sanctioned or is an individual in the gang sanctioned by Australia? Because if they are, you're now committing a felony by paying. So what happens is there's actually an investigation around sanctions and who's involved and trying to identify who the criminal gang actually is before you make the payment. And then they're quite smart around it as well, because the insurance company's got to have arm's length from a legal perspective in case they've made a mistake. So the business, so let's say it gets negotiated down to $500,000. So you want to pay it because you don't want the data going onto the dark web.
Yep, but
right?
That's fair enough.
Okay, so you're going to, you've decided, okay, we're going to pay it. We're still going to have to notify everyone. We can do all the right thing, but we're going to pay to try and get it not onto the dark web. And that's a decision for the business. And I've got more to say about that, but I'll come back to that. So they investigate, no, there shouldn't be sanctions. So the company itself would have to fund the $500,000 and they're not going to get the money so the insurance company is not going to pay, right? What has to happen is the business has to pay because now legally they made the payment. So if it is sanctioned, it's on that business. And then the insurance company will reimburse it.
So you've got to find yourself $500,000.
Or $1 million or $20 million or whatever they're asking for.
And then hope that the insurance company is going to reimburse you down the track. And who knows how long down the track?
Yeah, I don't know. This is we should invite an insurance person on.
We should do that.
We can have a conversation. Exactly. Because I think it would be quite interesting to understand the background of that.
Well, especially with other insurances, like sometimes there's, long lead time. And I mean, that's a long time if you've had to borrow that $500,000 or $1 million to cover it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
Yeah, so technically you want to avoid jail time.
I think we don't like to avoid jail time.
Yeah, so that's there as well. So you can see the number of parties that are involved is pretty insane.
Well, I think that is one thing that people don't realize is just after the fact how much goes on behind the scenes to get that business back up and running.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's take this particular example, right? So the breach was detected. Luckily they did have a kind of a quicker warning system. So we saw the breach occur on Sunday morning, and we had their systems restored and back up and running by around lunchtime, about 90% up and operational by lunchtime Monday morning.
That's
or Monday afternoon. So that is pretty quick to be back. So they were running again, right? So full running, but now we get insurance involved, all these parties, and now you've got the owner of the business and various other people involved. We sort all those things out over X number of weeks going forward, lots of time. And then there's more time involved. And that more time is actually the notification. So you've got to notify the information commissioner, and they'll come back to you and go, they might go, we need a list of all the people. Now, remember, they've paid a party to do the PII search to identify everyone that's caught up in this particular breach, because you have to notify every single person. Right? So you're not just notifying the government that there's been this breach. You have to go to every single person that's been involved in that breach and explain to them briefly what happened, what data was involved, what they can do to protect themselves, and then offer potentially more help if they need. So to call. So immediately what you have now is you've got, in this case, there was probably about 3 staff full time for about 2 weeks calling all these people.
Oh, I feel like that would be an awful job.
It is. It's absolutely a terrible job because you might potentially have irate customers, etc. Having said that, what I will say, because I did get some feedback, is most customers were very empathetic to the business and said, oh, really sorry that's happened to you. It must be awful, and so forth. So I think, a lot of people are starting to understand, where this fits in and its impact on,
Do you think it's because people are becoming more conditioned to hearing about data breaches and their information being taken?
Yeah,
whereas maybe 10 years ago,
Medibank, Optus,
Yes.
etc. Yeah, it's becoming more of a norm, unfortunately. Doesn't mean it's right, or you have to accept it. And for me, there's a couple of things. There is education of business. What do you need to be doing to protect yourself, or at least reduce the risk, right? That's the main thing. When you're talking about cybersecurity, you could throw so much money at it and you're still not going to be 100% safe. You never 100% de-risk the situation. So it is a risk strategy. So how much do I invest to reduce the risk to an acceptable level to run my business? And that does take some thought. I would put it out there to anyone that owns a business. I'd be like, right, what personal identifiable information do you hold on your customers, right? So think about what you collect, dates of birth, etc. Think about what you collect. Then the next question is, where is it stored in your business, right? Because I can tell you what, most people are asked is, number one, they're not 100% sure of what personal identifiable information they do collect. So they've got to go and ask. Like the business owner would be like, oh, go ask the business manager here, the sales, what are you collecting, right? So there's a bunch of stuff there. Then where is it kept? And it's like, ooh, okay, that gets interesting. I'd be like, do customers email you stuff? Oh yeah, all the time. Not good. So you've got driver's licenses sitting in people's emails, various emails actually, right? Plus then they store that to the central, repository or whatever. And then they go, what about when clients come in and they scan their passport to do the 100-point ID check? We're like, yeah, okay, so is that sitting on the machine that the scanner's attached to? Probably. Do you copy it somewhere? Yeah. Is that then copied into the case file? Okay, so it's sitting in 3 different places, right? Okay. And then I'll be like, who has access to it? Oh, no, well, the client files are locked down to only these particular people can see it, let's say it's lawyers as an example. Only these attorneys can see that, I'd be like, okay, but what about the scanning machine? Who's got access to that? Oh, anyone. Okay, so anyone's got access to all the data. Great. So if you start digging, and I suggest you do, that's where you need to start tightening up.
Well, because you don't even think about those things, do you? Like even
Quite often,
you go
no.
and, hire a car. What do? They take a photocopy of your license, and where does that end up?
Yeah, I know.
Do they shred it later, or does that just sit in?
I absolutely hate that. Yeah, they'll be filling in a form, and it's like they've written down your driver's license number, your address where you are, and then they make a mistake, right? And they put a pen through it and they tear it in half and throw it in their waste paper basket. I'm like, sorry, could you just take that back and pop it through the shredder that's sitting next to it?
But see, most people wouldn't even think to suggest that. I mean, since working with you for over 5 years, I've definitely become a lot more paranoid in a good way. But most people wouldn't even think to say, can you please shred that?
No, absolutely.
Or where is that going? Where is that going to be filed?
It really does come to a bit of paranoia around here is probably not a bad idea, right? So protecting your own data is important. But again, as a business owner and a business, what data are you collecting? Where is it stored? So is it stored appropriately? Who has access to it? And the question that you quite often should start with is data cleansing as well. So It's a case of going like, well, there'll be client files, let's say, and this could be an estate agent, it could be like so many different places, right? And it's like, okay, they got files that are 15 years old. I'd be like, why do you still have it?
I mean, right? That's a long time.
Exactly. So from a legal perspective, yes, there might be certain legal things like keeping stuff for 7 years or 10 years, or in medical, it might be up until the person gets to 18. There's lots of different rules, right? But do not keep information that you do not need, because it is literally a target, right? That is a potential for more cost to your business when that data gets breached, right?
And see, people just wouldn't really think about it. They just have it probably stored away and...
They don't.
No. Data cleansing, you almost make it sound relaxing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is why you're collecting the data in the first place. Because the other one is like a common one is collecting dates of birth. I'd be like, please don't. They'll be like, no, but we like to hand out birthday gifts.
That's right. I always lie anyway.
I'd be like, well, that's a good strategy.
Always younger.
But I often just do like birthday month then, please. Like you don't need to know, even if you take the year away. So it can be the day. But you need to be careful on that one as well. Because, if I can get that data as a criminal and I know the day and month, then I look at your Facebook and people wish you happy birthday or whatever, and then I look back through your phone and there's an old graduation photo. I can quite often work it out, and so can a criminal. So you do have to be careful with
I've
the data.
I've definitely been a bit more mindful about the social media aspect.
It's a big one.
Since starting at Mercury.
It's another one I love to go into businesses and not necessarily talk to business owners at that point, but actually talk to staff. And quite often when I'm talking about securing a business, right, you start with personal. It's about what people do on an individual basis. So what is their cybersecurity hygiene look like? What do they do on a day-to-day basis? Do they use a password manager or not? Do they store all their passwords in their browser? Bad idea, by the way. Don't. Use a password manager. And I'll go through why. So why shouldn't I store it in a browser? Why should I use a password manager? Why should I use different passwords on all how am I going to remember all of them? Back to the password manager and so forth. You run through it, and social media is a huge one, absolutely massive. There's quite a few things online where you could see people posting social media, started my new job today, and they've got photos with their new team, and they've got their badge on, and it's got their staff ID on, and criminals will zoom up, get the staff ID, etc., make a call, pretend to be from the IT, going, hey, Alicia, I'm from IT, it's Chris, by the way, congrats on the new job, and you pretty much at ease at that point. They go, I just want to confirm, just to make sure that I am speaking to the right person. So they turn this around and go, your staff ID is da-da-da-da-da-da. And you go, oh, yeah, it is. Great, I'm talking to the right person. I need you to reset your passwords on da-da-da-da, and you're done. They send you a link, you click, and yeah.
And that's so simple. And if you don't stop and think about it and question it, it's boom, you're done.
Unfortunately.
And I think that is one thing with, obviously we have our own internal training, is just really reinforcing to stop, take a minute, think about what you're clicking on, check the email address. And it is something that, life's so busy, everyone's busy that you
click,
yes,
get it done.
Yes, exactly. So I think the training has certainly helped slow down the team to make sure that we're not obviously putting the business or ourselves at risk.
Yeah, and it happens all the time. I was telling you this morning, I was going backwards and forwards with a scammer yesterday. I got an email. It pretended to be one of the owners of Mercury, AJ, and it was like, "Oh, are you busy right now?" And it was to my personal address. So they've obviously cleaned that off LinkedIn, right? They've worked out in Mercury that AJ is one of the bosses. So now pretending to be AJ. And of course, I like to play along with this sort of stuff because I use it in my training. So I've got a nice email trail of exactly what they ask, how they ask, so I can then present that back to people going, here is a real life example of them trying to get me to go and buy gift cards.
Well, they were certainly targeting the wrong person, weren't they?
Yeah, well, potentially.
They didn't do their full research.
No, it was a little bit quick maybe. But to be fair, they were targeting about 4 to 6 people yesterday in our business.
Wow.
So, it's for us to see that. We put an alert out globally across teams going, hey, just be aware, this is what's happening. But, there's pretty much no one in Mercury that's going to fall for that because of the training. And, we speak about this sort of stuff all the time.
Well, I guess that's kind of what you were talking about earlier too, is that you can only put so much in place, but then it also comes down to your staff and human error.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if mistakes get made, and they will, what is your resilience plan? And that is absolutely critical. And again, kind of part of this talk going, well, what's the true cost? So there's a couple of things here that we've spoken about. The number of parties involved, the time involved is huge. And then if we look at the financial costs, just to put it in perspective, this particular breach was in around 1.2 million. As a total cost. So when insurance got all those different parties to do the investigation, they cost you $24,000 to check that it's not sanctioned. It's about, $40,000 to run the PII checks. It's $15,000 for legal advice. It all adds up, right?
I mean, that's a staggering amount of money.
It is. And then think about it. If your insurance, and this is common, can't remember with this particular case, but your insurance, you might be insured for $500,000. Well, now you have to come up with $500,000 to $700,000, right, to cover up the shortfall.
Which for a small to medium business
is going to be hard.
Yes.
Yeah. So in this particular breach, as an example, just to give you an idea of the size and the type of business, we've already said there was a lot of PII involved in the business. So you kind of understand, I guess. So it's probably a professional services type business or real estate or something like that. And it was about 40 staff. So that gives you a size. So 1.2 million as an overall cost. And then that doesn't take into account staff time cost.
Yes,
that's not in there, right? And that is potentially also very expensive, So 3 weeks of time lost across 3 different staff members plus the owner of the business. It adds up. It's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly would add up. And I guess people don't really think about that aspect of it, do they? They just think data breach, oh my goodness, information's getting out there, got to pay the ransomware, but all the behind the scenes costs and time is...
Absolutely. And there's a good question where you said, I'll pay the ransomware, is quite often, the correct course of action is to not pay the ransomware either. So you look at how Medibank dealt with it. They were like, no, okay, data's out there, we're going to have to deal with it, right? There is talk, for instance, that the government making it illegal to pay the ransom because the idea is if the businesses keep paying the ransomware, it's not going away.
So, well, that's true.
So
it's just more incentive for
how do we draw a line in the sand and stop it is you just force businesses not to pay. Will businesses go under because probably. And that's maybe where the government needs to have a think about it. Okay, well, what support are they going to give businesses that are impacted by ransomware and they can't make their wages payment, for instance. So they'll go bust, they'll go broke within 2 weeks if they don't get some sort of help from the government. So, I mean, that's something I'd like to see, that there's a little bit more help, support from the government, especially if they're then going to mandate not paying. Then it's like, okay, well, how are we going to balance this? Because you're talking about, and it's going to impact, unfortunately, small and medium business. So now you're talking about a lot of people just losing their jobs, and it's a horrible situation overall. Which I suppose, when I'm talking about this and the true cost, so now we have a kind of an idea of what's involved, and it's a little bit overwhelming is a good word. Yeah. But then we've got to say, okay, well, what can you do? What should you be doing? And some of the stuff that I'd say straight up, because there's obviously lots of different things you can be doing, and quite often that's a problem as well. So where do you start, right? For sure. And the advice I would give to start with is the Australian government, so through the Australian Signals Directorate, right, initially, and now with the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, basically put together a number of controls for initially government and contractors to government. And there were 37 controls that they put together going, these are the types of controls that you should have in place. And they kind of ordered them in kind of best to nice to have, let's say. And out of those controls, there were the kind of top 8, which they referenced as the essential 8. So the essential 8 as controls is something that businesses definitely should be looking at. So this came about 2017, so it's been around for a while.
Oh, okay. Longer than I thought.
And government agencies are supposed to have this in place, and some do, not all. They're getting there. But there's different maturity levels as well. So maturity level 1, 2, and 3. I mean, there's 0 where you meet none of the controls. But
you don't want to be that person.
you don't want to. So the idea is that most businesses, most small and medium businesses, should be aiming at least a maturity level 1 in essential 8 controls. And they're things that you would expect, right? If you've read anything on kind of cybersecurity, which is things like having backups, as an example. Yeah, so pretty basic stuff. Things like patching your software, like we spoke about that. Things like using multi-factor authentication on your passwords, things. So those are some of the types of controls that we're talking about. And the government just last year launched a training program to train assessors of the Essential 8. So that's something myself and Martin within Mercury have done. So we've been on that training through TAFE Cyber. So like I said, government designed training to assess Essential 8 controls. And it's definitely something I'd recommend as a starting point for businesses. Do an Essential 8 assessment so you can see where you are currently with your controls and then start working towards it. That's going to be the important thing. It's not a case of like, okay, I need to get all these things in straight away. It's very, very difficult to do straight off the bat. But if you've got a plan, a project over 6 months, 12 months, where you can, go to if you've got an incumbent managed service provider or go to a specialist security provider. And then like, for instance, if a customer comes to us, we'll go through that and then we'll show them the gaps. Right? What parts are you not meeting? And then we'll put it in like a priority order. We'll be like, look, this is probably these 3 things cost nothing to do. So get those done now. Internally, you can do that. It's like, write a policy on this. Go do it, right? And we can help, check it, etc. Give them some advice. And then there will be things that do cost money that you should potentially put in place, like something like application control. Right? It's one of the controls in Essential 8 that you should have. So it's like, okay, application control, yes, we've got a solution for that. That's what it costs. This is how long it's going to take to roll out. And where do we put that? Well, can't afford it right now. Okay, can we budget it in 3 months' time? Yes, put it on the roadmap. And at least you've got a roadmap and you're working towards a maturity
You've got a plan,
level.
don't you?
That's the idea.
You can see where you're at, see what you need to get to, because, I mean, it's not going to get any better out there, is it?
No, and that is a very good point. And that's the thing. There is no magic bullet Like you really do have to be careful with that because, well, sales. It's like, people coming to your business going, yes, we've looked at your business and we've worked out big red flags, your printers. Mm-hmm. Your printers are going to be hacked. I'm like, yes, potentially true. Last thing you should be worried about when you have all these other things that you haven't done yet, right? So, and obviously that's a sales tactic, right? They're not wrong, but the focus is like in the wrong place, which is why I like going through something that the government has gone, this is the type of thing that you should be doing and what you should be aiming at. And then we can prioritize that list based on, hey, this is a high risk, so you should get done first. Versus, you can replace your printers with more secure printers later, once you've done all these other things.
Well, that's it, isn't it? Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, it would be quite overwhelming. So to be able to have an Essential 8 assessment done, it probably simplifies it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, Essential 8's not the only framework that you can work towards. So other businesses, like a larger business might decide to go with something like an international certification, like ISO 27001. Now, that's a security and international standards organization security certification.
I'm pretty sure I've heard you talk about that one before.
Yeah, it's a good one to have, but it is quite laborious to get. Mm-hmm. But if you were a contractor to government or like in the public eye a lot or etc., then it may be worth going down that path. Another one that's a little bit more broad is something like the NIST cybersecurity framework. That's something I've spoken about a lot. I think I've done some videos on our website around NIST as a control system. And you can also use those together. So it's really, again, up to the business to decide. Talk to an expert around cybersecurity to have an understanding of what's going to suit your business best, right?
Well, that's it, isn't it? Yeah. Because it's not sort of like a one-fits-all kind of situation.
It really isn't. And I would say if you don't know and you don't know what to, then just stick with Essential 8. Start there at least, you know, and you can get that maturity roadmap moving. Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners today? I mean, I'm pretty sure you've terrified us all, but
I think that's the main thing is just being prepared. We quite often I would say that cybersecurity has been focused on all the stuff that you can do pre-attack, pre-breach, right? And that stuff's important. And I would say most, hopefully, businesses have a lot of those things in place, whether it's firewalls, using a password manager, using MFA, having backups, all those things are kind of pre. But don't forget about what happens when you breached, right? Because that is a common saying is it's not if, it's when. Like you've heard it a million times.
I have heard that a million times.
It really, really is. As I don't care how secure you are and what you've got in place, you will be breached at some point. So when it happens, what are your resilience controls? Because it's really, honestly, it's really about how fast can you get your business back on track and running and serving your customers? How do you survive? That's the thing. Any business owner or board should be sitting down and actually asking the board, right, if we had a breach that did this, we had ransomware, everything shut down, how do we survive? That is an honest question. You need to sit there and think about it and actually go, it's going to happen. So that, deal with it now. I'd even go as far to say boards should be running exercises. At least once a year. You should be sitting down and actually running through an actual exercise going, right, we've got ransomware. This is what's happened. The technical teams have told us this. As a board, how do we respond?
Do you think by doing something like that too, it does take the emotion out? Because if and when it happens.
Yep, agreed.
It's not sort of your hot off the collar kind of, freaking out because you haven't spoken about it.
Where's
or
our breach response plan?
Yeah,
it's
you
like
sort of
everybody knows.
It's almost like having a fire drill.
It is exactly like a fire drill. So I would say your technical teams probably drill a little bit more because there's a lot they have to do on the back end. But don't forget about your executive team as well. So often what's left out as an example is if you are a little bit more public facing, right? What are you saying to the newspapers when they come? So businesses that are prepared for this will generally have pre-prepared statements about whether it's ransomware, whether data has been leaked or not, where they are, etc. And you'll see which businesses do this well because they'll get breached. That information goes out instantly.
Yes.
There's none of this, no one say anything. It's like, Medibank, what's happening? No one knows. You just wait, right? Now, businesses that do this well, they're well ahead of the game. This is not coming out from a journalist first or anything like that. They're immediately coming out and going, this is what's happened. And it is very important that you say things like, our teams are on it. We've engaged with this. We've engaged external cybersecurity help. We're looking into, we do not know the extent of the breach at this moment. We are looking. As soon as we know, we will let you know. Because that's better than crickets.
Definitely. Well, then people just come up with their own versions of what's happening. And
exactly.
That can sometimes be even worse than what is actually happening.
Absolutely. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily the correct approach. Every business needs to make a decision of what they think that approach should be because it is your decision. But then sit down, work out what that statement looks like, right? And that would quite often go through legal. It's going to go through your PR. It's going to go, but do that. But don't try and scramble when your systems are down. Everybody's panicking and no one can think straight. And so back to cyber resilience.
Good tip there.
Practice. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, look, it's been a great talk today. I'm sure that the listeners all have plenty to think about. If people want to reach out to Chris and hear a bit more, what's the best spot for them to get in touch with you?
I would say LinkedIn is probably the easiest. So if you just search for my name, Chris Haigh or Mercury, it will pop up and you'll see me there.
I think you might be actually Christopher now.
I have changed it to Christopher to match my passport.
Which is a whole other podcast.
Just so that you know that it's mine.
No, that's great. Well, thanks a lot for coming along today. It's been a great chat.
Awesome. Thank you.